on. So welcome. Kudos to all of you for carving out the special time, um, using it for something productive, purposeful, and it's truly enriching. So tonight's lesson is titled, sorry for the background noise. Tonight's lesson is titled Created Equal, Exploring a not so self-evident truth. Here we are. If you have the books, you can open to page 106. If you have the link, you're welcome to open that up that I just sent. And we're going to go along with the PowerPoint as well. So we opened up this course when we started. Judaism's Gifts to the World. And we put out there a question. We said, suppose you play God for a moment, or at least a country builder, and you had the power to impart as a value into the society. What are the most important values that you hope that everybody in society adopts and lives by? And it was pointed out the golden rule. The golden rule is treat others how you would like to be treated yourself. And other societies and cultures have a variation of it. In Judaism, it's an ethics of the fathers. Was this always the case? Today we take it as granted. Obviously, it's common sense. You don't treat others the way you don't want to be treated yourself. The way you don't want to treat, that's what you strive for. The fact that we all assume that today that it's a value is a tremendous leap that humanity has taken. Because it was not, and we're going to read through this in just a moment. Text one, we're going to start with the reading from Rabbi Sacks, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. Just by way of introduction, the natural world that surrounds us is a hierarchical world, which means those that are more powerful are dominant and have greater inherent rights and consume those that are less powerful. And the prism that the natural world around us functions is not one of equality. It comes as no surprise then that as humans are observing what's going on in the world around us, we don't necessarily take that for granted. Let's see text one from Rabbi Sacks. The mythic universe is hierarchical. That we now know is the significance of those ancient buildings, the ziggurats, constructed by the Sumerians at the birth of civilization in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley. Their architecture was not so much art as cosmology, a theory of the universe given physical shape. The successive tiers of the buildings represented the rule of the higher powers over the lower powers. The strong rule the weak. The many dominate the few. The powerful hold sway over the powerless. In ancient myth and ritual, kings are or aspire to be gods. The rest of humanity in its various gradations is replaceable. They are worker ants serving the queen, the beasts of burden serving the master. The gradations between ranks and classes were as inevitable as those between animals in the struggle for survival. This was self-evident. This was a rule of nature. It was reality. Okay, so this is Rabbi Sacks. Very learned individual. His observation of the ancient worlds of the Mesopotamian area. We're talking about pre-Abraham. But if you go all the way down to the recent modern bastions of culture, the Greeks, the Romans, it was not very different. Text number 2, I'm going to read from a recent work. I'm sorry, we're reading, it's basically a quote from Plato, so sorry, not so recent. Here we are. All of you in the city are brothers, but the God who made you mixed some gold into those who are adequately equipped to rule, because they are most valuable. He put silver in those who are auxiliaries, and iron and copper in the farmers and other craftsmen. For the most part, you will produce children like yourselves. But because you are all related, A silver child will occasionally be born from a golden parent, and vice versa. It blows the mind. It blows the mind. It's very simple. Some humans are more valuable and some are less. Some are made of gold, some are made of copper, some are replaceable. Um, and that's really, I mean, this was a philosophy that he was writing to inspire actually the masses to accept their role and come to terms with it. You are inherently different than the leader. We pointed out that the natural world functions very much on this system, that the powerful consume and dominate and just devour the weak. The gods of the ancient worlds were no different. The gods were no different. So they looked up, they looked down. The gods in the world is essentially it's one god warring with another, a more powerful one, trying to threatening a less powerful one. And so there's inequality enmeshed and embedded in the very fabric of nature. Where you look up, you look down, there is no equality. Why should humans not act the same? Let's go to one more reading here, text 3. It's from Joshua Berman in his book, How the Bible Broke the Ancient Political Thought. Within the Mesopotamian, Ugaritic, and Egyptian conceptions, it is not the common man who is the central focus of the gods, but the king. Okay? So how humans related to the king, I'm just pausing from the reading for a second, it was the kings only cared about the ones made of gold. Let's continue. In Mesopotamia, portents of evil, such as an eclipse or an earthquake, mandated human action to placate the gods. But the action mandated was solely that of the king. Only he recited prayers, offered sacrifices, or shaved his head in obeyance. Nothing was required of the people at large. It was not the people the Mesopotamian gods held accountable, but their king. Who cares about people? We care about the most important people. Let's continue. Religion on a national scale was one from which the common man was generally excluded. Religious laws for the masses are sparse within Hittite legal codes and are entirely absent from Mesopotamian ones. The common man in these cultures had only a small role to play in the public worship of these deities, which was relegated entirely to the king and the priests. Okay. So more recently, we're reading from some old readings here. We're seeing the old ancient societies pre-Abraham, but we're also going and visiting as recent as the cultural and deep thinking, philosophical cultures and worlds of the Romans and the Greeks, and it doesn't differ that much. Plato, right? He's talking about people made of gold and others of copper. You're inherently different. More recently, there's a popular book, Animal Farm, right? Political satire. And what's a famous line from that book? All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others, right? Okay, so obviously it's poking fun of the way certain governments functioned at the time, paying lip service to equality, but it's not. Those that are close to those in power, they line their pockets, they manipulated the system, and in the name of equality. But hear this, at least in common more recent times, everybody needs to kind of answer to the fact that they're equal. Whether or not they're equal or not, they're faking it. It's just lip service. But in ancient times, there was no lip service. It was enshrined. This was the way of thinking. This was the philosophy. It was unapologetic. This is how you ought to believe. This is how the world functions. Okay. All right. So far, what do we have? I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint here. Feel free to pipe in with questions. Let me share. How do I do this? 1 second. Share screen. There it is. Slide. Okay, modern society, equality, it's basic. The ancient society, not so much. It's a hierarchy. What are the implications? And here's the big deal. So you're going to say, well, all right, fascinating. They say it this way, we say it this way. Are there ramifications, are there implications to the general, to how it trickles down in the quality of life for the common person? And there are many, many implications. We're going to focus on four. We're going to focus on four major takeaways. Number one, abuse. If I am better than you and I'm inherently higher than you, and I'm a better breed than you, then I have every right to abuse and take advantage of for my own self-serving purposes, to take advantage of somebody who is of less value than me. I mean, isn't that what humans do to the mineral life and to the animal life, to the animal kingdom? Well, if humans are I'm inherently different than another. So depending where I am on the map, right? If somebody's more powerful, it goes without saying that there are the people of a lower caliber are disposable, or at their disposal, shall we say, for whatever they feel they want to do. Okay. Number two, we spoke about a golden rule, right? What was the golden rule? Treat others, right? They had a different golden rule. He who has the gold rules. The golden rule. Yeah, right. So if you're made of gold, then you should rule over those that are not, that are made of copper, that are made of less. Okay. Next, inequality before the law. If people are inherently unequal, members of a lower class, no doubt, they suffer a greater punishment for the same crime. And again, this wasn't it didn't have to be a cover-up. It was in the law. It was enshrined in the law that if a king does, or if a priestly individual does something, they are going to be treated with this kind of punishment. And if an ordinary person does it, it's a vastly different punishment. This was the law, and this was common sense. This was common sense because people are different. If you have the book in the appendix, you'll see some readings about that. Number three, individual rights, collective coming before the individual. Okay, this is an important one. Okay, the constitution of a government is, why does the government have a constitution? Why don't you just always enact laws based on the majority? Because the constitution is essentially saying that the majority will make laws that are favoring themselves at the expense of the minority, and the minority will have no voice. So the constitution is there. Modern countries, societies, create a constitution, a bare minimum, a basic respect that will always have to human life, because every human deserves at least this. That's the constitution, the basic protections in place. This was non-existent. Why was it non-existent? Because why should I respect the individual of a minority, of a lower class? It's the ruler, it's the leading class, that's what matters, and that's all. And that's all that should matter. That's the philosophy that bears out of that's an obvious result of seeing people as inherently different. It went a little further, thinking about a mass, when the world's caught up in a mass crisis. It was common if you needed to placate the gods because something bad is happening. So who did you have? Who are you going to offer up as a sacrifice? Not the people of gold. You're going to offer up the copper people. You're going to offer up the lead people. You're going to offer the people that are of less value. They're disposable. We need to give up 1,000 humans in order to placate our God. Forget about the nonsense of placating the God. I mean, that's not the point here. But these 1,000 lives don't matter, because what matters is that the people that are of higher caliber, that are made of important stuff, that they're going to survive this. That's what matters. Finally, it's probably blocking it. I don't know how it is on your end. I'm going to try to do this. Okay. Let's see how this points out for now. Finally, withholding education. It's widely known that ancient societies were mostly illiterate. Okay, so you're familiar with the word in the Egyptian language of hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics means language of the priests. That's what it means. Language was for the priests. That's what language was for. If you're a priest, if you're in the ruling class, then you deserve to know how to read. If you're not, you don't know, you shouldn't know how to read, because I don't care for you, A, and B, you might threaten the ruling class. And so it's by design that those in the lower class should be kept illiterate. Clerical, right? Clerical, which means both priestly, and it means secretarial, which being literate. Clerical, that's the same idea. To be priestly and to be literate was synonymous, went hand in hand. Okay, now, all right, okay, so we're gonna wrap up over here. People would say, well, people were very busy making a living then. They were working in the fields, they had no time to read. The Jewish people were also busy trying to earn a living and try to survive. But education in the Jewish community was vastly different. We're going to highlight and come back to this all the way at the end. So we highlighted 4 points, the implications, obviously so many more. And we're going to then, from here to the end of the lesson, we're going to unpack the Jewish paradigm of equality, what drives it, how did we see it, how the world picked up on it, and how it is the antidote to these 4 major major failings of society, and the Jewish perspective, and how Jews historically have done in the above 4. Okay, how are we doing? How are we doing so far? Okay. All right, feel free to pipe in with a question. I don't know if I have access to the chat. Do I? Let's see what's going on. No, chat's quiet. Okay. Close the chat again. Okay, so here we are. And let's get to the Torah. Let's get straight to the Torah's perspective on equality. What drives the Torah's approach? So right in the beginning of Genesis, we laid the groundwork right away. We already brought up this verse. We're going to build on this once again. And God created man in his image. These are the opening words of the story of humanity. What is and who is humanity? God created man in his image. This changes the conversation in the most radical form of how we see and approach a human. If human is made in God's image, then every human is made of the same gold. This nonsense of one being made to serve others inherently, and one is created to be served, is flawed, because every human being is made of the same golden stuff. Now here we are in text 5, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. A sentence was uttered that heralded the greatest paradigm shift in the story of humankind. So God made man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. This single proposition was an explosive charge at the base of the entire structure of the ancient and medieval world. It took millennia for its potential to be realized. But once stated, the rest was inevitable. From it would flow the great ideas that changed the West. The sanctity of human life, the dignity of the individual, human rights, the sovereignty of justice, the rule of law, and the idea of a free society. Nothing could have been more counterintuitive. That kings, rulers, emperors, pharaohs were the image of God, that much the ancient world knew. But that we all are, that was revolutionary. Yeah, so here we have it, very well put. Before we unpack it, we got to stop and pause for a second, because this opens up a whole new can of worms. Don't know if you thought of it, but we're talking about the value of each and every individual. So I have a question. If each of us, what gives us our inherent value is the fact that we're created in the image of God. Okay, so we have right now 7 billion images of God. Okay, so what happens if you do away with one? You have 6.999 billion left. So who cares? You have enough images of God walking the earth. In other words, we've elevated the role of the human to being extraordinary, to being made in the image of God, a sliver of divine right here. But no human being seems to be unique. But that's where we need to finish the discussion. We're going to unpack the Talmud, a fascinating piece of Talmud, in just a moment. The gist of it is this. There's 2 points to this. Yes, we're created in the image of God, but there's something you must add. If we're all created in the image of something finite, a coin, we're all made in a certain image. All right, so then, right, you go to the mint. Okay, the mint is producing massive amounts, quantities of coins. Okay, every coin is made in the exact same image. All right, this president, that president. Okay, so you take one coin out of the mix. Okay, so I have so many others. It doesn't seem that now everybody's feeling threatened. But when it comes to the image of God, it's different because God is infinite. And so when we're saying that there's every human being is created in the image of God, what we're saying is that there are infinite variations of the burst of divinity. Each human being is a walking, unique burst of divinity right here. We're saying 2 points. The humans are created in the image of God and they're the extraordinary. And number 2, because we're talking about God here, that makes every human, which is in the image of God, unique and irreplaceable. Unique and irreplaceable. And to drive this point home, we're going to visit a Talmud, a piece of the Talmud here, a Mishnah, Tractate Sanhedrin. The Mishnah addresses a simple question. Why is it, when you read the story of Genesis, everything's created in multitudes. There are many animals created. Every vegetation emerged. In every kind, it just says the species emerged. When it comes to the human species, why was it not the same case that God would just create a people to emerge? Rather, God created man, singular. Why is it such? Why did God make it this way? So the Talmud unpacks this in text number 6, if you have the book. Initially, only one human being was created. Number 1, the Talmud is going to give us 4 reasons why. Number 1, to teach us that one who destroys a single life, I'm just going to read the first 2 now, and then I'll pause the text. To teach us that one who destroys a single life is considered to have destroyed the entire world. One who saves a single life is considered to have saved the entire world. Okay, because humanity was created one to teach you the value of human, that a single human life is an entire universe. That's why God created the human in singular fashion. Number 2, to maintain harmony among humanity. That one person would not be able to say to another, my progenitor is greater than my progenitor is greater than yours. So the second point here is talking about equality. Nobody can say I'm better than yours because we're all made of that same unbelievable stuff. We're all made of the image of God. So that all talks about the value of humanity, that we're created in the image of God. But where do we see uniqueness? It seems then that we should be replaceable. And that's where the Talmud puts in the first piece. Now remember that each one is unique. Each one is an entire world, because we're each a unique burst of divine image that's right here in this world. And it's fascinating, as the Talmud, only once you appreciate. I'm going to read now the final reason the Talmud gives. Talmud gives 4. Actually, I'll read the other 2 in a moment. So you see the first 2? First one is saying, why is Adam created as one, as singular? Because God wants to make the point that you're all equal. Nobody should say I'm better than you. We're all coming from the same thing. In other words, we're all coming from the same image of God. But where do you see the uniqueness? God created man singular to tell you that each one is unique and is an entire universe. Now the Talmud continues, and Talmud makes the point that now that we know this, this is an extremely important and empowering message, not merely for human rights, but for understanding our role. the contribution that each of us makes is not just divinely, but is unique. Each contribution of each human being is unique because the human being whom it stems from is a unique variation, is a unique, you know how, once in a while you get a rare coin, it's a rarity, right? Wow, this is so rare, there's only 100, right? So each human being is so rare that there's only one of. But once you get to appreciate that, you realize the role of the human being as follows. I'm going to read now the point number 3 and 4 that the Talmud makes there. Again, the question was, why was humanity created single rather than a people emerging? So number 3, so that heretics should not say that there are many gods, each creating its own line of humanity. And number 4, to communicate the greatness of God, for when a person mints many coins from the same mold, all the coins are alike. But God mints every person through the mold of the first human, and yet no two people are alike. Therefore, every person must say, the world was created for me. So once again, the Talmud is wrapping up these ideas and is making the point very, very powerfully. The point is this: each of us are created in the image of God, but we're all unique because God is infinite. So no wonder you can have infinite versions of God. And secondly, the world was now created for me. Wow, what does that mean? And we should all expect everything from the whole world because I'm worth so much and everybody should serve me. No, that's not the point. The world was created for me. My role in this world is unbelievable. It's unbelievable because I am unique. There is no other variation of me, never was, never will be. And therefore my role within the story of humanity, my role, my contribution to this world is absolutely unique. Okay. How are we doing? How are we doing? The week before Rosh Hashanah, let me just catch up here on the slides here. And God created man in his image. So here we are. This whole thing's being turned on its head. Every human is equal, but if all people are equal we are equal expressions of the image of God, are we not redundant? And that's where we must get to the flip side of the coin, no pun intended. A kingdom priest, I'm going to skip this. I'm going to go. Okay, we'll skip that. But here's an important reading before Rosh Hashanah. What do we read? There's always the Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah. Atem nitzavim. You are all standing before God today. It's a very powerful, empowering Torah portion. But in that opening verse, there's just you encapsulate these two sides of this coin. In one hand, God says, you're all standing before God. And then it continues, your leaders, your elders, the water carriers. There's so many different people. There's so many different roles that you play. Some are leaders and some are not leaders. But nevertheless, you're all equally standing before God. They're not mutually exclusive. It's okay to understand and appreciate that we have different roles to play, but at our core, we're bursts of God here, and that is an unbelievable and powerful foundation upon which everything else builds. No human being has less than that. No human being has less than that. Okay. So the gift that Judaism, that the Torah provided to humanity is the gift of the divine image, the gift of human dignity. It's a whole different approach how we see another person. What role does that other person play? So now let's revisit the 4 real major failings that we highlighted before. Abuse, powerful abusing the less powerful, majority just stepping all over a minority because who are they already, or an individual. Number 3, the value of education, or how it was robbed from the lower class. And number 4 was the value of, what was our 4th point? I think, I'm sorry, 4 was, oh, I'm sorry, number 2, I skipped 1, was inequality before the law. Let's see how Judaism stacked up. Let's visit some Jewish texts. Let's see somehow how the Jewish story unfolded in this field. Okay, let's first talk about abuse. Okay. If everyone is created in the image of God, well, obviously, what right do I have to go mess with an image of God? Who cares that I'm in a position of leadership and the other is not? You're an image of God. You don't mess with an image of God. Talmud famously expresses this point. Text number 8, I'm going to read here. A man once came before Rava. Rava was a great, outstanding Talmudic sage. His name appears and resurfaces in the Talmud almost every second or third page. And said, the ruler of my village instructed me to kill someone, and if I refuse, he will kill me. Do I go and kill that someone to save myself? Rava replied, allow yourself to be killed and don't kill the other. Why do you see your blood as redder than his blood? Why do you see your blood as redder than his blood? Rava is echoing our sentiment here. The sentiment is, you're all equal, you're inherently equal. Because your value is, why is your blood red? Why can't you stand yourself being killed? It doesn't feel good? No, because you're an image of God. That person's an image of God too. You're not better than them. You can't go and actively go and snuff out another life to spare your own. Doesn't work. But there's a second point here. It's not just that we're all equal. There's another point here. What if I'm going down? What if I was mistreated my whole life? Is my mitzvah merely to treat another person as at least as good as I was, and I had a pretty awful life? Is that the mitzvah? Is that what it's about? That we're equal? So if I had a terrible childhood, it's okay for me to give my children a pretty poor childhood, pretty poor education. That's what I had. So we're equal. So the first idea maybe would say, well, debatable, yeah, maybe equal, at least equal to you, at least as much as you were treated, or at least as much as you can tolerate. No, it doesn't work. Love your fellow as yourself. You might say, well, okay, as much as I love myself. But there's a greater value. There's a greater value. It goes deeper than that. And where it goes deeper is that if we're all created in the image of God, it's not only that we're all equals, because we're all equally created in the image of God, but how must we revere another human being? How must we approach another human being? Who are they? It's an image of God. So, hey, I had a terrible childhood. Hey, I was mistreated. So what? Here's an image of God. That's beside the point. That's terrible. We'll deal with it separately. But here you're dealing with an image of God. How do you ought to think an image of God should be treated? That's the question. And abuse, it has no room in the Jewish worldview. And for this, I'm going to read a reading here, an author, Rabbi Avram ben David, 12th century, who makes this point. I believe he lived in Egypt. Am I right? No, in Provence, province. Okay, southern France. Here we are, 9b. From the first verse, we only learn the first verse, meaning the verse of love your fellow as yourself. He says that doesn't yet capture our interpersonal approach between man and man. From the first verse, we only learn to love another like yourself. Thus, a person who had been shamed, cursed, victimized by theft, or beaten might think that it is permissible to allow a friend to be similarly shamed, cursed, or beaten. Therefore, the Torah says, in the likeness of God, he created him. That's a greater statement. As if to say, who are you shaming? Who are you cursing? The image of God. Thus, this verse is a greater principle than the first. This is a powerful lesson. It's a powerful lesson in how we approach another human being. So here we are, love your fellow as yourself. It only means as yourself, as you expect to be treated. But in the image of God, it's with respect. You got to, oh, totally up the notch. It makes no difference if I feel that I was mistreated. And the main thing is that an image of God stands before me. How should I treat them? Next, number 2, the divine image gives us the gift of equality before the law. So the contrast, and you can see it in the appendix if you have the book, was how the law literally was different. It was a literally different law. It wasn't sugar-coated. It wasn't shoved under the rug. No, it was out in the open that those in a ruling class had a much lesser penalty for things that they have done. How did this pan out in the Jewish system? So I'm going to read here. It's actually in the appendix if you have the book. Next 19. Malchei Beit David. Although the kings of the house of David may not be included in the Sanhedrin, not for now, separate discussion. Sanhedrin is the supreme Jewish court. They may sit in judgment over the people. Conversely, they may be called to judgment if a person has a complaint against them. You have a complaint, you need to bring it before the law. They stand trial like anyone else. Okay? There's no protections in the Jewish system in how they ought to. It doesn't mean that they don't have a different role. It doesn't mean that they're not. There were kings in the Jewish system, but the king, the lowest and the highest, it wasn't of a vastly different. It was a role that they played. It wasn't an inherent view of they're made of other stuff, because the most simple individual citizen was in the image of God, and the ruler was beholden to the law. That's as far as the gap went. In the Torah, you have this time and again. It always resurfaces, right? Don't favor the rich. Don't favor the wealthy. It also says don't favor the poor. But tzedek tirdof, law is of utmost importance. Okay, here we are. We had the next discussion here. Divine image, the gift of individual worth. We spoke about that in ancient times. What was the value of an individual? Who cares? If the value is, if the masses or the rulers especially are here to stand to benefit, then of course the individual should be tossed to the side, devoured, consumed. Who cares? They have their value is if they can serve the ones in the higher class. And in Judaism, let's see the Jewish perspective. Okay, imagine the scenario. Imagine this case. I'm reading a case from the Talmud. Before I read it, a group of Jews are traveling. Okay, so it's a very sad a tale, but let's say it's a hypothetical tale. Unfortunately, it wasn't always hypothetical. But if a traveling group is confronted by militants, okay, an enemy, and they say, "Give us one from your group, and we'll kill him. If not, if you don't turn anyone in, we're going to kill all of you." Halachically, the Jewish halachic perspective, what should you do? Let's think of it in hypothetical. Do we say, I don't know, make some kind of internal raffle to cast a lot? Give someone, at least we'll save more people. What would you say? Laura, what would you say? Okay. All right. So I think you just took it off mute. In any case, I do hear you now, Laura. If you just wanted to chime in, okay, I guess not. Okay, so what would we say? Okay, so here this is what the Talmud says. Okay, this is what the Talmud says. Maybe that's it right here. Exactly this question. The Talmud's answer is as follows: even if they are all going to be killed, they should not hand over a single soul. Should not hand over a single soul. Why? Okay, first of all, clearly the Talmud is anti becoming a part of assisting murder in any way. When it comes to murder, there's no justification for being part of it. Murder meaning taking an innocent life. What the ramifications are, I give up. Let God take care of the rest. Number two, no one person is better to be deemed as a sacrifice. In the ancients, they would laugh at you. This doesn't make sense. Figure out who's the most important person. They for sure should be spared. Who's the least important person? That's how they would go about it, perhaps. In the Jewish system, there is no discussion because every person is equal, because equally in the image of God, don't mess with any individual. It tells you about the unbelievable intrinsic value that we put to each individual. This is a sad scenario, but take this value, you take this perspective on life. You take this perspective on life and you flip it. And let's talk about a more optimistic, a more inspiring situation, a more inspiring scenario. The value that we place on an individual, not really on a collective. Okay, as a teacher, is a teacher teaching the collective of the class? Well, I think education has come a long way. We don't see it that way today. A good teacher is praised for bringing everybody in the class on board, for seeing the potential in an individual child. It's not about, hey, what's the average of my class? No, but what's every individual of my child of my class? Obviously, it's easier to focus on the goal, on the general, on the collective. But Judaism says, no, the individual is critical. The individual is critical. We showed a film a couple of weeks ago at Chabad. It's called Outback Rabbis. It's about two Chabad couples who did who it's called RARA, Chabad, regional and rural Australia, and they're out traveling for weeks. They do these, long trips a number of times a year, a few times a year, literally traveling for days in the outback. One town they'll find one Jew, in another town we'll find two, literally collecting them one after the next. And one of the rabbis in the interview. It was aired on PBS. It's probably showed there periodically, but one of the rabbis, the way he put it, said that we're coming. A lot of these individuals actually were children, descendants of Holocaust survivors. He says if the Nazis were, in recent history, able to hunt out every Jew out of hate, we can take a page in the positive, in the realm of holiness, to hunt and look for every Jew out of love. And they can justify the budget. They can justify the trek. And I think it's part of the Chabad training that, it's not about, I'll travel the day if I can go and find that individual and bring them and reconnect them to their heritage. It's not about the collective. Hey, is Judaism going to survive? No, is that individual going to survive? Are they going to remain faithful? And this is a very, very Jewish perspective and how we see the individual. Okay. Divine image, and here we are to the fourth antidote to the corrupted system of the hierarchical approach to the value of a human life. And this is the value of education. We pointed out that it was on purpose, by design, that the masses, especially the lower class, were deprived of an education. How did the Jewish community stack up? In Judaism, it's widely known, all who could be educated were educated. The drive for this, okay, what was driving, it's the value that every individual has. It wasn't just parents saying, I want my child to be a good doctor. That's not the point. It was about, every child in our community deserves this. That was the Jewish approach. And I want to point out here, text 12. I want to read this fascinating reading. So we know, well, first of all, Pesach is coming up, right? What's Pesach all about? It's about education. Education appears in the Shema. The Shinantam Levanecha, teach it to your children. The value of education, they deserve it. It's not about my success. I want to see that nachas. I want to see my child succeed. I want to see what they're going to make of their life. But I owe it to them. They're Tselem Elokim, their divine image, a walking divine image. How could I deprive them of something so basic that's going to give some satisfaction to who they are And especially Torah as our destiny, as our soul, as our nourishment, is interconnected with Torah. So Pesach's coming up. Yes, it's all about education. It's the highlight of the Seder. It's what it's all about, answering the questions of the youth. What if a father can't educate a child? So here the Talmud, a beautiful reading that, as we're going to see, the Jewish leadership stepped in, ensured that no Jewish child would be left behind from education. Here we are. I'm going to read this from the Talmud Bava Batra. Yehoshua ben Gamla is remembered favorably because if not for him, the Torah would have been forgotten. Initially, fathers would teach their children Torah, but orphans had no one to teach them. This continued until Yehoshua ben Gamla instituted that teachers be installed in every province and town. Children were admitted into school at the age of 6 or 7. Yehoshua ben Gamla did this for the orphans, but the Talmud is now a couple hundred years after this episode, and the destruction and the banishment of the Jewish people from the land of Israel, the dispersion of Jews all over the world. And the Talmud says, hey, Yehoshua ben Gamla, if not for his drive, because of his deep Jewish-seated value in education, and literally probably the first, it's been pointed by some historians, probably the first effort in human history to provide an elementary education for every child in the community. Yehoshua ben Gamla, the Talmud says, if not for him, as Jews were becoming dispersed, and parents were all over the place trying to survive, and had the Jewish community not centered around the value that there must always be a cheder, there must always be a day school, there must always be a school where the children are going to learn the Torah, would have most likely been completely forgotten. So in a sense, he did it for the orphans, but eventually everybody stood to benefit from this. Something I wanted to point out. So yes, even it's true that until recently, 100 years ago or so, Jewish education for all, no social hierarchy, every individual deserves to know their mission, and to be intertwined and interlinked with that. I just want to point out two things I want to point out. The last two, just to quickly recap, we spoke about in the Jewish perspective, there's no such thing as abuse. Everybody's a Tzelem Elokim. Not just we're all equal, but we all are, we owe it to appreciate that other individual as a Tzelem Elokim, as an image of God. So treat them even better than ourselves. Number two, we pointed out, inequality before the law, no, didn't exist in the Jewish system. Number three, we pointed out the value of an individual. You don't give up an individual even if the whole group is threatened, because you don't mess with the Tzelem Elokim, with an image of God. And I want to point out and add on that just a little thing. We spoke about the inspiring approach that we can take on how we view an individual, because an individual is a world, an individual is an image of God. It's infinite, it's a burst that is irreplaceable. You can justify the effort, the money, whatever it takes to reach that individual. Somebody had pointed out, an Israeli journalist, that the probably would be very difficult to find another Jewish leader who had a one-on-one interaction with as many individuals as the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the late Lubavitcher Rebbe. So this is you can tie it in to appreciate the one-on-one attention, the dollars that the Rebbe would stand for hours for many years on Sunday. But prior to that, he always made the effort and opened his schedule up through nights to meet individuals. But the amount of tens of thousands, literally, he was driven by this, by the value of an individual, by a yachid. Each individual is a world, and it really is. I wanted to point out about education, which was our fourth point, the Jewish antidote to this corrupt world view of this of the hierarchical system, and the value of education. So it's a beautiful little episode that somebody was pointing out. Until about 100 years ago, yes, girls in the Jewish community, as in many others as well, they weren't given that same opportunities in education. But in the Jewish community, even though the formal education was not, didn't take that same role, there was a basic, the knowledge of how Judaism is done, that was no doubt passed down. Women were empowered with that kind of knowledge. And somebody pointed out, it was just, recently they were doing a whole a koshering of chickens. It was before one of the holidays. They were doing it in the yeshiva. And there's a whole process of salting, especially when you're doing it in bulk. It's not simple about salting. Say what kind of dish must it be and while it's being salted, the dish must have holes. How long did it sit for? If you salted it and it sat in the dish and it didn't have holes, it actually poses a bigger problem because then it sucked the blood in again. In any event, they were coming up with questions. They kept on running back to the book. And at a certain point, the rabbi said, "This is crazy." That was like deep into the night. He called his elderly mother and he says, "We have all these questions. This." She just went through it one by one. She says, "This is kosher. This is not. This is not. This is." She was a simple woman who knew how to keep a kosher kitchen. I mean, then they salted it in their kitchens. And so the basic Jewish knowledge was no doubt the domain and of women as well, equally to men. So, okay, here's we spoke about the Jewish approach. It's fascinating, and we're going to play this video now to appreciate how this journeyed from the Torah to society at large. Let's open up the video. Okay, Elizabeth, I see you're still with me here. One final takeaway here. One final takeaway as we wrap up the journey of equality, the Jewish approach to equality, is this. Even today, you find equality, the value of equality is very much like, hey, don't mess with my rights, don't mess with so-and-so's rights, they deserve. Because I'm equal, it's always synonymous. I'm equal, therefore I deserve. The Jewish concept of equality is much more linked and is more comfortable with being linked with, I'm created in the image of God, therefore, not I deserve, therefore I deserve to do. Therefore, I have an unbelievable role. Therefore, I have an unbelievable duty. I'm that important. I'm that important that my contribution is unbelievable. The shift in, and this is critical because we can say, well, we got the gift. Humanity has gotten the gift. No, I think that without this, the gift is really still empty because it's important, but it's empty, meaning to say it hasn't really reached its full potential. The full potential is recognizing our role as being created in the image of God. And here's the critical point. Being created in the image of God, what is God doing? God is giving. God is providing. So if I'm created in the image of God, does it not follow that I must act more godlike and provide and give and fill the needs and be there for others as well? I'm going to finish with this Talmud here. As God clothes the naked, as it is written, and God made garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them, so should you dress the naked. As God visited the ill, as is written, and God appeared to Abraham in the plains of Mamre. Abraham was ill then. So should you visit the ill. As God comforted the mourners, as it is written, and was after the passing of Abraham, and God blessed the son Isaac. So should you comfort the mourners. As God buried the dead, as it is written, and God buried Moses in the valley, so should you bury the dead. You want to really internalize what it means being created in the image of God and a unique variation of that image of God. Be godlike, give, provide, be there for others. That's what it's about. The great story, the author of the Tanya, the first Chabad, the Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he was imprisoned by the Tsarist Russia for the crime of founding the Chabad movement. He had those that said that he was supporting Israel. Israel was then under the Turkish. They were an enemy to the Tsar. In any event, he was sent in prison for 53 days. It was a big threat to his life. But eventually they got wind that this was just a libel against him. And at a certain point, an important, very, very prominent minister close to the Tsar heard somebody of the Alter Rebbe stature, who was known far and wide as an astounding Jewish sage and scholar, that he was in prison. So he said he wanted to go personally and visit him. But not to impress him, he just put on ordinary clothes. He was a learned individual, and he was learned in the Jewish Torah as well. He wasn't Jewish, but he goes in dressed as an ordinary person, and he says, "Here, I'm here to visit them. I'm working in the prison." Alter Rebbe realized, got a sense that this is somebody of importance, and he says, "Listen, Rabbi, I've always wondered, what is this business with God asking Adam, Ayeka, where are you?" In the opening of Genesis, after he eats from the tree of knowledge. What does that mean, where are you? So first, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, tells him Rashi's answer. Well, it was a way of going into a conversation. He shouldn't overburden Adam, a kind of to suddenly shock him would be too much. And so he started with like small talk, small chat. Hey, where are you? He says, yeah, I heard that. I'm looking for something new. So the Alter Rebbe looks at him, grows serious. And he says, the Torah writes Ayeka. Says that it's God writing this into the Torah to tell each of you, each and every single one of you ever reading this book, whether you're 53 years old or any other age. Where are you? What have you accomplished in your God-given mission of your role within the human mission, your unique role, if you're Jewish within the Jewish mission. And that's what Alter Rebbe's message. The man was floored because Alter Rebbe exactly called out his age that he was. But the point was that Ayako, Alter Rebbe says, it's a question. It's a rhetorical question. It's a question that any person, it reverberates. It should always be personalized, because if I'm a unique person like Adam, the whole world's created for me, so where am I? That's the takeaway. That's the most important takeaway from the Jewish approach to equality. It's not enough to pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, we were the first ones to say it, but the Torah says it best. That's the point that we want to take from here. Understanding the value of an individual, the infinite value of an individual, and our roles as individuals to live up to that unbelievable calling, the unbelievable role that we play. Thank you for joining us. Our regular daily nuggets will continue throughout the rest of the week. Next week, we'll have the last of the series, Progress, the gift of progress, the Jewish aspiration for looking for a world, a changed world, a different world. We're going somewhere. We're going to look at that as our final lesson of Judaism's gifts to the world. In the meantime, have a good evening.
Thank you, Rabbi. Very good. Excellent.
Thank you for joining us again, Elizabeth. 2 in 1 day.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And this really makes my heart feel good, because this is the way